April 2, 2025, marked a significant turn in global trade policy with Donald Trump's authorization of reciprocal tariffs impacting a vast 180 economies worldwide. This action is seen by proponents as a decisive challenge to the prevailing norms of globalization, representing a sharp policy pivot aimed at prioritizing domestic interests. Supporters characterize it as a necessary step to safeguard American jobs and industries against decades of perceived economic imbalances stemming from international trade agreements. The announcement reportedly sent ripples through international circles. Concerns were voiced in multilateral forums and business summits like Davos, while manufacturing centers in East Asia, heavily integrated into global supply chains and reliant on American consumption, faced heightened uncertainty. Economists quickly weighed in, raising concerns rooted in established theories regarding potential impacts on consumer costs, demand elasticity, and the principle of comparative advantage, arguments frequently cited in opposition to broad protectionist measures. However, the strategy driving this action was framed less by traditional academic economic models and more by a strategic calculation centered on America First principles. This policy shift was presented not merely as an emotional response but as a calculated effort encompassing political, financial, and national security considerations. It was portrayed as amplifying the voices of American workers, particularly those in manufacturing sectors, who feel their livelihoods have been negatively impacted by global trade dynamics. From this perspective, globalization is viewed not as universally beneficial but as a system that has disproportionately cost America, a dynamic this action aimed to fundamentally alter. When we tune into left-wing intellectuals on TV or delve into their writings, we often hear globalization celebrated as a remarkable evolution of humanity, a harmonious connection among nations bound by affection. However, it's crucial to remember that the first wave of globalization did not emerge from friendship. It was born of bloodshed, domination, and the ruthless pursuit of wealth. In the 16th century, following Columbus's fateful voyage that uncovered America, home to millions and rich in ancient civilizations, the reality was grim. The Spanish wasted no time converting this vibrant continent into a vast silver mine and graveyard. Instead of civilizing or uplifting the indigenous peoples, they annihilated the rich cultures of the Aztecs and Mayans, fueling their empire with violence, ambition, and forced conversions to Catholicism. This so-called empire on which the sun never sets, was erected upon the bones of native populations and the silver plundered from Peru. By 1545, Spain had stumbled upon the immense silver deposits of Cerro Rico, allowing them to mint enough currency to flood Europe and plunge it into an unprecedented monetary frenzy. The Spanish silver dollar, or peso de ocho, emerged as the first global trade currency, reaching far beyond the Atlantic to Asia and Africa. Yet, beneath this facade of wealth lay a darker truth: every coin was stained with the blood, tears, and shattered spirits of entire nations. Spain's rapid accumulation of wealth mirrored that of a lottery winner, spending lavishly without foresight. Rather than investing in local production or technological advancements, they chose a path of dependency, importing everything from English wool and French wine to Dutch textiles and Chinese porcelain. Their empire resembled an excessive consumer, paralleling America's trade excesses during the globalization phase known as 3.0, before Trump aimed to recalibrate that pattern. As affluence insulated the Spanish aristocracy from daily struggles, their adventurous spirit faded. They neglected local production and embraced extravagant spending, allowing the manufacturing sector to slip away to foreign hands while driving domestic prices sky high. What was the outcome? Once the world's wealthiest nation, Spain fell into a dependency on silver exports, much like someone hawking their wedding gold to finance a smartphone. Their version of globalization was literal. They exported the very essence of their production capacity, choosing instead to survive on ill-gotten gains. To sustain their colonial rule, Spain repeatedly embroiled itself in wars, accruing vast debts and facing inevitable bankruptcy. The latter half of the 16th century saw the Anglo-Spanish War erupt, culminating in the destruction of Spain's once invincible fleet. The early 17th century brought further decline with the outbreak of the 30 Years' War in Europe. The Habsburg dynasty, which included Spain, suffered defeat, paving the way for Dutch independence. From that moment on, Spain's glory waned, marking the collapse of the first empire that had once boasted of an unending sunset. Consider this: if U.S. presidents continue to overreach through military interventions, sending troops to costly conflicts like those in Iraq and Afghanistan or, more recently, in the Russo-Ukrainian War, and possibly the looming China-Taiwan standoff, could America find itself on a similar downward trajectory as Spain? This context sheds light on why Trump urgently sought to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan, cut off funding, and encourage dialogue between Ukraine and Russia. His vision surpassed that of many contemporary leftist ideologies. As Spain's fortunes dwindled, the global power landscape shifted, making way for rising contenders, the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. The rivalry between these two powers was intense, fraught with tension akin to a taut bowstring. Ultimately, taking advantage of advantageous geography and strategic acumen, the UK emerged victorious, gradually ushering in the second wave of globalization. This era was defined by the Industrial Revolution, which catapulted Britain to the forefront of global influence. By the mid-19th century, British industrial output represented a staggering 40% of the world's total, an achievement that earned it immense respect across Europe. The British were not only formidable in production but also astute in establishing the rules of the global game. They championed free trade and developed the gold standard, an almost unassailable monetary system. Why didn't they opt for silver, which was widely used in Asia? Because Britain controlled the South African gold mines, housing half of the world's gold reserves. Holding on to gold equated to wielding the power to mint currency, which in turn represented the ability to steer global dynamics. It was a straightforward yet profoundly effective strategy. The British did not shy away from using force, evidenced by the Boer Wars, to defend their financial dominance. However, complacency often haunts empires inundated with riches. The British elite began to luxuriate, indulging in comfortable lives that sometimes bordered on lethargy. They drifted away from technological innovation and manufacturing, opting instead for pursuits in poetry and theater while sourcing goods from around the globe. As the manufacturing cycle pivoted to the United States and Germany, where creative and industrial energies remained fervent, Britain found itself gasping for breath. The world wars proved catastrophic, delivering crippling blows that extinguished the once mighty British commercial empire. The British, who had led the charge for globalization, ultimately relinquished their dominance, allowing the United States to ascend as the next global superpower. When the dust of two world wars settled and the sun set on the British Empire, a new superpower rose from the ashes, the United States. With unmatched industrial strength and a booming economy, it took center stage in shaping the third great wave of globalization. The curtain rose in 1944 at Bretton Woods, where world leaders gathered to blueprint a post-war economic order. With most nations war-torn and depleted, America stood tall, like the last banker in town after a financial collapse. The deal was simple on paper: the US dollar would be backed by gold, and the rest of the world would peg their currencies to the dollar. What seemed like a stabilizing framework was, in reality, a clever financial pyramid with the US at the apex, but empires don't always follow their own rules. In 1971, with inflation surging and confidence eroding, President Nixon abruptly pulled the plug on gold convertibility. Just like that, the Bretton Woods system collapsed. The dollar was no longer grounded in metal, it now floated on oil, politics, and American muscle. To keep the dollar on its throne, Washington planted deep roots in the Middle East. Military bases, oil deals, and strategic partnerships ensured that global energy stayed priced in dollars. The greenback wasn't just a currency, it was an empire in paper form. But every empire eventually meets a challenger. Enter China. In the late 1970s, China cracked open its doors to the world. Gone were the days of isolation and ration cards, in came factories, free markets, and a disciplined workforce willing to work for peanuts. While America slowed its manufacturing engines, China revved up, and the world watched in awe. A strange but profitable rhythm emerged. China made, America bought. China exported, America swiped credit cards. One side built the goods, the other built debt. And for a while, everyone was smiling. Chinese cities exploded with jobs. American corporations pocketed record profits. Wall Street buzzed, shelves overflowed with cheap imports, and consumers barely noticed the shift. But the gears of globalization grind hard, and soon the machine began to creak. The heartland of America, once filled with humming factories, started to rust. Blue-collar workers lost their footing. Engineers took gig jobs. Farmlands carried more debt than harvest. Globalization had turned lopsided, efficient for profits, brutal for workers. Meanwhile, China climbed to the top of the global supply chain. From T-shirts to Tesla competitors, from smartphones to supertankers, China's manufacturing dominance became impossible to ignore. Today, it produces nearly half the world's ships. The U.S. just 0.2%, even America's mighty Newport News shipyard, the only facility that can still build aircraft carriers, faces a labor crisis. Skilled welders and machinists are scarce. For the first time in decades, Americans are starting to question the rules of the global game they wrote. Yes, they still lead in finance. Yes, the dollar still reigns. But the foundation beneath that power, industry, labor, and control over essential goods, is slipping. The empire holds the checkbook, but others make the goods. And that, perhaps, is the true cost of Globalization 3.0. Then came a voice that cut through the political noise like a chainsaw through velvet. Swaggering onto the world stage with gravity-defying hair, a booming promise, and a cap emblazoned with 4 iconic words, "Make America Great Again," Donald J. Trump wasn't just running for president. He was waging a cultural, economic, and geopolitical revolt. Where many saw globalization as the golden road to peace and prosperity, Trump saw something else: boarded-up factories, jobless steelworkers, ghost towns in the Rust Belt, and an America drowning in cheap imports and foreign debt. He wasn't interested in singing Kumbaya around a global campfire. He wanted America back in the driver's seat. Roaring down the road with a V8 engine of jobs, industry, and national pride, to Trump, the so-called miracle of globalization was a con game, one that benefited Wall Street, China, and multinational corporations, while gutting the American heartland. He didn't care for the flat world theory pushed by liberal academics, and he certainly didn't trust the efficiency numbers spit out by think tanks that seemed to always enrich Beijing and impoverish Pittsburgh. For him, Globalization 3.0 wasn't a free exchange, it was a bad trade deal with the devil, and he was determined to rip up the contract. That's why he drew a red line, on imports, on foreign labor, on decades of political consensus. When he began imposing tariffs, the international community gasped. Economists reached for smelling salts. World leaders scolded. But Trump wasn't flinching. He wasn't fighting the future, he was fighting for a version of America that had been forgotten in the back alleys of free trade. He didn't just want to renegotiate trade. He wanted to reboot the entire operating system. In Trump's vision, America needed a hard reset, shut down the code written by globalists, unplug from a broken network, and install a new national software where America came first, not as a slogan, but as a strategy. And zooming out, you could see the cracks in the shiny facade of globalization. What began as an idealistic vision of shared prosperity had, over the years, devolved into something less noble. Economies became tethered to a handful of global supply chains. Sovereignty was quietly sacrificed at the altar of efficiency. Whole regions became vulnerable to distant disruptions. Globalization wasn't evil, but it wasn't working the way it was promised. Globalization 3.0, powered by the US-China tandem, did accelerate the world into a new era. But the price was steep. America traded factories for finance, and China traded discipline for dominance. The result? A planet that moved fast but spun off balance. And here's the eternal truth of economics: imbalance never lasts forever. Something, or someone, always breaks, which brings us back to the world's economic foundation, the US dollar. You might wonder, if globalization is dead, what comes next? That's the trillion-dollar question. Because while the US model falters, no clear replacement has emerged. The euro is a regional giant with too many strings. The yuan is tightly leashed by Beijing. Gold. Too inflexible for the algorithmic age. So despite the global grumbling, the world still uses the dollar to price, trade, invest, and save. It's the awkward hero in a play no one dares recast. This is the paradox that haunts global finance. Everyone sees the system's flaws. Everyone agrees it's unfair. But no one can walk away from the table because no one has a better deck of cards. Even those who rail against America's financial dominance end up hoarding dollars anyway, because it's the least bad option. Want to replace the dollar with the yuan? Fine. But that means China has to do what the US did for 70 years, run massive deficits, consume more than it produces, allow free capital flows, and accept the offshoring of its factories. That's not an upgrade, it's economic suicide for a country built on production. Want to return to the gold standard? Sure, if you're ready for relentless deflation. Collapsing credit, and a financial system that grinds to a halt every time someone sneezes, so the world sticks with the devil it knows. And Donald Trump? He saw that devil clearly. That's why he wasn't just tweaking policy, he was flipping the entire chessboard. By imposing tariffs on nearly 200 economies, he sent a message loud and clear: America still controls the gate. We're not closing it, but we're changing the rules for entry. He challenged the global status quo not with academic papers, but with action. He looked across the political aisle, across oceans, and across decades of economic dogma, and asked the forbidden question: why should America keep playing a rigged game? One where the jobs leave, the debts grow, and the factories collect dust. In answering that question, he didn't hold back. He declared war on the bureaucratic swamp, targeted China with surgical economic pressure, and worked to replace consumption taxes with tariffs, designed not to isolate America, but to pull its industrial backbone back home. His mission was clear: revive real production, restore dignity to labor, and build a nation that didn't just live off imports, but made things again. Tangible things. Valuable things. China got the message. Washington's moves didn't go unanswered. Beijing responded with its own economic counterattacks. Tariffs were met with tariffs. Deals were delayed. Supply chains quivered. For China, sitting back meant surrendering its strategic advantage. But fighting back meant risking a fracture in the global system it had spent decades mastering. And here lies the danger: when the world's two most powerful economies, one the banker, the other the builder, lock horns in an open economic war, the fallout isn't just bilateral. It's global. Countries caught in the middle find themselves dodging tariffs like landmines. There's no neutral ground when titans collide. This isn't a temporary trade spat. It's a foundational conflict. And it won't be solved by a photo op or handshake across a negotiation table. Someone has to blink. And so far, neither has. That's why, in hushed circles and speculative headlines, another fear is quietly taking shape, that this isn't just economic warfare. It's the prelude to something bigger. Something darker. A seismic clash not over tariffs or trade deficits, but over which system will define the future, and if no compromise is reached, if escalation continues unchecked, the whispers may turn prophetic. Some have started using three haunting words: World War III.